me. And I would say, my role as a developer advocate is to inspire our developers, also listen to them over different channels, produce content that is relevant to them, answer their questions and queries on Stack Exchange, also produce content in form of blogs, so also get their feedbacks around different technologies that they use, and also collaborate internally here with, product teams and R&D teams.
That is Mohith Shrivastava, lead developer advocate here at Salesforce. I'm Josh Burke, your host for the Salesforce Developer Podcast. And here on the podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk with Mo about modern application development and the content that he has been producing in order to get that information out to you. And we start, as usual, with his early years.
We also had some electronic subjects like, Verilog or MATLAB. So all those had a little bit of programming with respect to hardware. And also, I did code 8086. So one of my subjects was 8086, in which, we had this, you have to program registers, transistors, and things like that.
Right.
So I did those kind of instructions as well, like writing MOV command to move, allocating memories and stuff like that. So that was also interesting to me. But later I realized that in India, there's not a lot of scope for hardware programming. So, software was only our choice. And then I moved to a consulting world where, my first experience was working with an ESB software, like Enterprise Service Bus. And I was tired of starting and stopping the server. So, it did not sort of go well. Like after 3 months, I was not interested. My mentors were no more motivated. So that's where I heard that, there was something called Salesforce, actually, which was pretty exciting. And there's not a lot of talent in that technology. This is back like 2011. I got a simple assignment of, hey, can you build these objects for us as a part of this project? So I started working on building objects. And then the request slowly started moving to something complex. Like, can you write a trigger for us? Can you write this Apex service for us? So that's how I started into Salesforce world.
Interesting. So how did you find going from that kind of very distinct structure, right? Like that, like you're using something very server specific, you're coding in C. And then what was your first reaction to doing something like creating a custom object with a wizard?
Josh, like I was super excited. Like the moment I saw the Salesforce interface and the speed with which I could click through the application and build a complete application in 2 days. Like Josh, do you remember that, in those days, and I know you were an evangelist, in those days, I used to attend a lot of your sessions. So thanks for those. But we used to have this recruiting application cookbook where, it used to take you through a journey of how to sort of build an application, how to define your data model, how to write your security for the application, right? So I used those resources actually, and I was surprised, within 3 days of coding, I had an application, pretty much working end to end. So I could really see this is really quick and everything made sense. Like, for example, in Java, I was always like, why do I have to write a class? Why do I have to create an attribute? That never was clear to me because I was never exposed to data and, I was just coding at the application layer,
Gotcha.
So I was never exposed to okay, how are my end users sort of using this application? Because I was sort of a back-end web service developer, right? So getting that front-end exposure and an end-to-end application exposure did play a very, important role in my career because then I was like, okay, no more I want to be specific to one specific thing. I want to be a full stack developer.
I like that there are a lot of people who've come into our ecosystem because they got tired of spreadsheets and so they found something better, but you kind of came into our ecosystem because you didn't want to restart a server anymore.
Yes.
And then when did you get an opportunity to come over to the States?
Yeah, so I think it was 5 or 6. I think it was 5 years back. I got one of the projects where my previous firm wanted me to come on site because there was not a lot of developer talent at that time here, and the project timelines were like really very small. So they wanted some on-site developers so that they can reduce that time of communicating back and forth, and communicating between different parties can also mean that you're losing a lot of information all the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by being at on-site, you can really sort of ideate upon, you can bring your own ideas. You are designing in the same room with your architects, right? So that provided me to an opportunity to come here and work, and I worked there for some time, and then I was really interested in like end-to-end product development on Salesforce. Like till now, till first 5 years of my career, I was just doing system integration work, meaning I was like, there is one org that the client has, and we were trying to make that work and configure all the business processes.
Mm-hmm.
But then I explored this product development world, that is our ISV app exchange applications that one can build on Salesforce.
Right.
So I explored that world, and I got more interested in that because then I was like, okay, I can build a solution that can be used in multiple number of orgs. And that's where I decided that, okay, I need to work with a PDO, like a product development outsource, which essentially have our ISV clients as their clients. So I joined the PDO. There I worked as a developer and then as a technical architect. And we built some amazing applications, and a lot of companies are, very successful on App Exchange today. Some of them have, gone as, public companies also.
Nice.
So they've grown to a really good extent. So that gave me a whole new world of exposure around product development. And that got me more excited because, I wanted to always explore like, okay, what does it takes to build an application on Salesforce, and what are the different, steps that are necessary to, build a complete product on Salesforce, and how does the deployment look like? How does the support look like? And how does it's being sort of used by end users, and what are some of the challenges in that process? So, I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time there in the product development world. Yeah, here.
Nice. And then how would you describe your current role at Salesforce?
That's an awesome question, Josh, and I'm learning every day actually, and and specifically, I joined Salesforce when the pandemic sort of hit. So earlier I had this impression of, okay, I'll be going to different meetups and talking to developers. Of course, one day we will, but one day hopefully we will, right? But everything got digital, so I sort of started looking into, okay, how can I contribute, in this times, right? So I slowly started, sort of working with other developer advocates here, like Kevin, and sort of seeing, okay, how can I best contribute, right? So then I learned about this Trailhead Live. So we do Trailhead Live. So I do Trailhead Live sessions every week, almost every week, at least one session. So that was really good in exposure because then I can, pretty much live stream. So I was also very new to like live streaming, more of a webinar kind of person, right? But yeah, it was an interesting challenge for me to learn all these, tools and technology to go live stream something.
Got it. And that's an interesting point, is that transition that, we've had a lot of this year of like webinar to live streaming. And I think like somebody listening to this might think, well, that sounds like kind of the same thing. Like, how would you describe the distinction and the different workflow between those two?
Yeah, very, very good question, Josh. Actually, both of them are different. That was also my first impression, like the one that you described previously, like both are same. I also thought both of them are same. So I went through my first session. I remember I recorded that. I did not go live. And while I was recording it, I sort of realized this thing that it's not same,
Right.
Whatever I'm thinking right now when I'm recording it, right, or whatever the portions that I'm sort of editing it should not be edited. I did not feel good about it after I recorded my first session that, I really want whatever I'm thinking to convey to my, my audience. Like, for example, let's say I'm Googling something, right? I'm Googling or I'm looking at the dogs. I want the transparency with my, audience, right? So that's when I realized that, both of them are really different. In one, like in pre-recorded content, it's really good, especially like we have this quick takes, right? So quick takes, pre-recorded content is really good because you have limited time and you're trying to convey certain thing, right? While if you want to, sort of showcase how to like code or use a specific language, like for example, if you're writing a JavaScript code, right, or if you've written a Lightning Web Component or something like that, it's always better to go live and do that because your audience is also learning along with you, and they learn a lot of things not only by just hearing to your content and going through those presentations, but also actually seeing you how you're like thinking and approaching that problem. So that way it is very different. Like you are exposing yourself to showcase like how you are thinking in live coding, which to me was very new. And once I realized the power of it, I really started to sort of go live, with less preparation as possible. Like for all these sessions that we do, right? There is some amount of prep that is required, but again, it's not, I do not prepare myself a lot, and there is nothing that I practice. Like, for example, for recorded content, right? You typically write certain thing, write your script, think about what message that you want to deliver, right? But on live code, it's usually like I pick up a requirement and then it's like, okay, let's code it. And, it's not that you will get the output every time. It has happened to us in the live code that we struggle on a problem for some time. And that's also part of the learning that I want to be really transparent with our developers here.
Gotcha. All right. So let's talk a little bit about that content. Tell me about the Modern App Development Series and what's the goal there?
Absolutely. So modern app development on Salesforce. Now, we came up with this idea that, so I looked into what is the future of Salesforce application development. So I spent some time with other developer advocates, leadership here. So I thought about this, and then I was like, okay, what does what it means to be a modern app developer on Salesforce, right? So one thing for me, it was very clear that it is no more just Apex and Visual Force. It's no more, you're no more restricted to that. Like the amount of innovation that has happened in the last 2 years in terms of tooling, in terms of technologies, like now you can write LWC for your front end application, right? So which is essentially you're using JavaScript there, so it has more capabilities than Visual Force, because it was with Visual Force and stand-up markup you only had certain things, right? Obviously you could bring other frameworks, etc., but now that you have this LWC, you have developer tooling, like for example ScratchRx, and all the tools that we have like Salesforce CLI. And also, so these are a couple of innovations, right? And also some of the innovations in low-code tools that also got me interested. For example, dynamic forms, dynamic actions. You can do a lot more with that. Flow screens, right? Flow screens is one of the other technology that got really excited. Like I got really excited about, flows, especially the screen flows, like how you can quickly build like a multi-page application using flows. So today, in today's world, right? Again, the world we are in now, right? Digital, everything is changing to digital, and customers want really best when they invest in Salesforce, they want best out of Salesforce, right? And for our developers, it's a challenge, right? Because they have limited time. So the approach to build an enterprise application, in my experience, has been combine both the low code and pro code. You will need both. You'll need low code. You'll need pro code. Right. Both of these combinations of tools, right? And also, you want to scale your applications. Now, that's the other area where we focus in this modern application development, is scaling these applications. And it could be, we are not limited by the limits of Salesforce to some extent, and we use Heroku actually, to scale our application. So we have a lot of Heroku content here. Specifically, we learn how to write microservices using Node.js, because we know that once we sort of use both of these tools like Salesforce core and also the Heroku platform capabilities, then we are more powerful essentially. So adding both to the mix of our architecture, right? It gives us that more capability for us to go and scale our applications.
Right. Well, in using that as a segue, we should give a shout out to your co-collaborator, Julian Duque.
Yes.
How important has that collaboration been for the series?
It's been awesome collaborating with Julian, because I am not 100% and I'm not an expert on all the offerings of Heroku. And that's where, I collaborate with Julian, because Julian brings in a lot of these new excitement to the series. He knows a lot of JavaScript technologies. He knows a lot of open source libraries in Node.js. So we use Node.js, right? So we think that Node.js, now the thing about Node.js that's so important to understand is it's JavaScript. So it's JavaScript on the server. So it's the same language that I'm learning to write Lightning Web Components. With some modifications and some more learnings, you can use it on server, like on Heroku writing this Node.js applications. So Julian knows a lot of these open source libraries, like what open source library should we use for, let's say, a web worker, or like creating PDF, like PDF Maker and things like that. So he has a lot of those knowledge. So I've been collaborating with him to see how we can, sort of use, those Node.js libraries to do some of our business asks. Like, for example, generation of PDF is a good example, right? We always take. Or let's say we want to do a bulk operation or invoke bulk API in Salesforce, right? So Salesforce provides the API for us. Now, especially for me, I don't have a lot of experience like with Python or let's say Ruby or something like that. Those are like new languages to me. So I still have a lot of learnings there. But one thing I'm so comfortable with is Node, because I know JavaScript.
Right.
So I'm assuming it's same for all the Salesforce developers. They are pretty much familiar with JavaScript, at this time. Or, the learning curve is little easier compared to other languages here. So that's where, we figure it out. Okay, how can we use these APIs that Salesforce provides with Node.js? And we use a lot of open source libraries like JSForce, or sometimes we build our own libraries, So that has been exciting to learn, because, and once we have learned that art of writing those Node.js NPM modules, you won't believe, Josh, like I'm now regretting that, hey, why did I write so many batch epics in my previous client's org? That's like I have used so much of resources that could have been used for some other important business process. So anything asynchronous, right, can really go as a microservices. And also microservices are easier to maintain, because it's its own layer. It's no more a monolith or a monolith application here. Everything can be divided into modules, and it's so easier to maintain that way. So the more and more I'm learning, writing Node.js and sort of exposing that as a microservice, more and more use cases I'm finding that I'm like, okay, this should probably not be an Apex, batch Apex, or a queuable interface. I would probably prefer a Node.js service because it's more powerful.
Yeah. Well, and so that's interesting because you have a long history of JavaScript, and I can only imagine that you and Julian are spending a lot of time geeking out on JavaScript. But your kind of your journey to learning the tricks on the server side, which seems like that's a lot of value paid off. Like you can build off of your previous experience with JavaScript, but you're finding all of these new frontiers of things that now you don't even need Apex for.
Yes, exactly. And Apex is awesome. Again, I love Apex for sure. Apex is awesome, but you have to use the right tool for the right job, right?
Right.
So it's not like I can use Apex. Let's say I have millions of records and I need to process them, in a batch Apex. Apex is not probably the right tool there, because you're consuming a lot of resources, right? But if you do it in Node, you will see that you can really write these applications quicker. And not only that, you can scale, like you can add horizontal scaling and vertical scaling in Heroku, which is something that I learned new. So in vertical scaling, let's say my process takes a lot more, it requires a lot more CPU, right? I can do a vertical scale of that. Let's say I have more concurrent requests coming into that specific process, then I can horizontally scale. So that has been interesting, because as an Apex developer, to me, right, there's nothing called scaling there. It's like you have this specific time and you have to make sure that you write your best code so that all of the processes get executed within that CPU limit. But with Heroku, I'm no more bound with that limitations. I can scale, I can horizontally scale, vertically scale, so I have that scalable options there.
Well, and I kind of feel like maybe you just answered this question, but it also feels like with all the talk we're talking about with Node and microservices and stuff like that, we should give a shout out to Salesforce Functions, with the warning that I can and probably will have to do an entire episode on Salesforce Functions. But can you give me the elevator pitch for Salesforce Functions?
Yeah, sure. So the elevator pitch for Salesforce Functions, right? So on Heroku, so we are doing all of these on Heroku, right? But you will still see that there is a lot more things that are required. Like, for example, to establish integration between Salesforce and Heroku, you need a connected app in place. You need to still create your Node script to run that server, right? So you need like an Express, or we are using Fastify for our e-cars application that we showcase or we use in our sessions. So there is still a lot of work. That's, again, you'll have to do the same work again and again if you're creating more services, right? And with Salesforce Functions, I the way I have learned about it, and again, I'm still learning. I'm a learner here on Salesforce Functions. but what I have learned in Salesforce Functions is to create a function and actually host it. It's pretty simple. You don't have to do a lot of those work that I was doing, like creating connected apps, creating or managing those Express server, etc. So there's a lot of same job that you have to do again and again. And that is where Function simplifies it. Also, another thing is in terms of technology, right? Like, the way the Heroku works, it uses dynos, and you have to, yourself sort of scale or set the scale meter yourself, right? And that's where I think the Salesforce Functions uses all the latest technologies of container, building applications using containers. So they use Kubernetes and Docker, and I'm hoping, again, I don't know, I'm not an expert here, but I'm hoping they're using Docker, because I see that one of the requirements is to have a Docker desktop to test it to test the Salesforce Functions locally, right? So they're all using the latest and greatest. That means it has a lot more innovations. The back end of it is more stronger, right? So any day, when Salesforce Functions sort of goes GA, it'll be an interesting idea to take all the work that we are doing and use Salesforce Functions for that and simplify our workflow.
I think you're safe from PM jail. I think you got all the good nouns there. And if anybody's listening and is curious about some of the technology behind that, you can go back to the November episode with Joe Kuttner, where we broke down cloud native build packs, which is one of the key ingredients, and also talked an awful lot about the history of Heroku and microservices and stuff like that. Okay, cool. So moving on to a different layer of modern app design, talking about the data layer. In one episode, I have to point out, you were using actually a favorite tool of mine that I think is underscored in our community. You were showing Julian around Schema Builder. Are there some specific things you like about Schema Builder?
Yes, definitely. So data model design, right? So we spoke about it upfront, because you know that, Josh, if you do not do your data model right, it's like laying your foundation right.
Right.
If you do not lay that properly, irrespective of you produce a elegant UI, it's not going to scale.
Right.
So we wanted to take this topic. So one of the topics we discussed were developer tools, and then we straight away jumped onto data, like how to create an efficient data model. So we have our episodes actually, so you can go and watch. So where we use Schema Builder and we compare and contrast actually, like, okay, if I have to, create a database, like for example, Postgres, on Heroku, let's see what are some of the the design techniques and how long it takes to create. And let's do that in Salesforce. And obviously in Salesforce, right, the speed with which you can build data models is really, it's really good. So you can build all these data models, and it's not just the data model that Salesforce provides. Like once you build data model, there's a lot of things that's going to come out of box. Like for example, security, because you have fields, you have profiles, you have the UI layer as well. Like you get page layouts out of the box, you get Lightning app pages out of the box, right? So you get a lot more things out of the box in an opinionated way, which is really good. So yeah, so we looked into the data model, and one thing that really struck was the Schema Builder, because in Schema Builder, you can really create these fields and objects pretty quick. But again, our message to our developers here was, see, you can build these very quickly, but that doesn't mean that you should rush into your designs. And that has been one of our key message in this modern app development. We want developers to also think through the design and not rush into things that will take time. For example, we know that you need to have a review process around your data model. Because let's consider an enterprise scenario where, there are multiple teams which are building applications and multiple applications. Now, if you do not collaborate, or if you do not have a proper process in place, what will happen is you will end up creating duplicate data models, and you have duplicate siloed data again. So it's not that, you're solving any of the challenges. If you do that, you're not going to scale. Definitely, you're not going to scale if you produce inefficient data model. So that's why we want developers to think through the process, think through the design, and then when it comes to building these, we show them how easy it is to sort of build all of them. So yeah, data model has been really an interesting topic that we did. Like we did a couple of sessions on that. One using Salesforce, and the other one was using Heroku Postgres, and where Julian sort of showed how to create them and how to use them on Heroku applications.
Gotcha. And I'm curious, when from like the greenfield state, and you're starting to work through the app design and the data design, and you're probably going to go with something that's a hybrid between Salesforce and Heroku. Are there specific considerations on the data design that you feel people should know about?
Yes, definitely. So definitely we want developers to use Salesforce as sort of a master for a lot of the data, because you can do more with Salesforce pretty quickly. Like for example, automation, right? You have you can write flows, you can write Apex triggers, and you can write process builders, etc. Although we recommend flows now. So you can do automation pretty quickly because of different tools. And also we have services on top of those data, like exposing them or locking them down based on the security and profile. So all those sort of requirements can be taken pretty quickly on Salesforce. So that's why we recommend that make Salesforce as your center of data, right? For all your B2B use cases, use Salesforce, build your data model on Salesforce, right? Now, when it comes to consumer facing application, that's where you need that data to show, or, you need to interact with that data. There you have multiple options, and the power of Heroku shines there because you can use the technology of your choice there. Like you're not limited by saying, okay, you need to use Lightning Web Components, etc. Right? Although I recommend Lightning Web Components now that, as a Salesforce developer, you learn them pretty quickly, right? You can reuse them on Heroku as well, using Node. You can, now we have also published an NPM module with all the Lightning based components. So you can use it outside Salesforce.
Nice.
Yeah, you can use it outside Salesforce. But yeah, the real benefit is, let's say somebody wants to build a progressive web app. Let's say there are 100 million of users, who are consumer users, like B2C users, right? So all the front end that you need for the application, right? Maybe you need them in your technology of your choice, like React, right? Maybe you're building a native mobile application using React Native, things like that. So Heroku really makes it so easier to build those kind of web application and host it on Heroku with the technology choice applications that with the developer skill set that you have. So Heroku makes a real use case. But all the data we finally wanted inside Salesforce, because then we can run all the automation, we can lock down the data, we can take care of the security, all of the goodness.
Right. And you have a demo in one of the episodes that we have the wonderful tool Heroku Connect if there's some kind of Venn diagram of stuff you want in both Salesforce and Heroku or the like. Yeah. Now, Heroku has access to NoSQL databases, something Salesforce doesn't, kind of has some comparisons to. Are there some really good specific use cases for leveraging something like Redis?
Yes, there are use cases. In fact, we talk about both Redis and Kafka. We also talk about Heroku Connect. Like, let's say Heroku Connect, especially if you want to sync all the data that's there in the Salesforce to your Heroku database like Postgres, right? That makes really good use case of Heroku Connect product. You don't have to build your connections. There's already a product that makes it so easy to sync the data in almost real time. No, I must say that it's not real time, but it's almost real time. So Heroku Connect is for that. Now you have Postgres, that's your default database, and then you have Redis. So Redis is like a caching layer, right? So let's say you want to improve the application speed and you don't want to go to the database again and again. That's where you can go and create a cache layer using Redis. Think of it as platform cache on Salesforce platform, right? So a lot of developers who are not familiar with platform cache, they should go check out platform cache. And we also did a session on Trailhead Live as well for platform cache, and I can share the links for that. So with the platform cache, what you can do in Apex is you can really improve the performance. Let's say you are querying the same data again and again. So instead of going back to the database and writing your SOQL again and again, you can just create a cache, like a platform cache, like a session or R cache. So you create the cache and then you just access it from the cache. It's like a in-memory store, so it's faster, right? So Redis is also same. It's meant to improve your application performance. And then we have Kafka, and we have an episode on Kafka as well. So in Kafka, what we do is it's for real-time data intake, right? So let's say you have a lot of processes emitting data, like let's say an IoT device, right? Like for example, car. For e-cars, we use we use IoT device. So IoT device can basically emit lots and lots of data. And let's say you want to stream all those data into Heroku, right? And that's where we have this Kafka connector.
Gotcha.
And then we show a lot of use cases for that, like how to stream the data back into Salesforce real time and show it just without storing the data. So we also show that use case. Also with Heroku Connect, right? You can use external objects of Salesforce where you can, really not store the data in Salesforce. It can still sit outside Salesforce. When I say outside Salesforce, it is still Salesforce platform because it's part of Heroku and it has all the security features essentially. So it can still be on Heroku and you can still expose it through the Salesforce native UI through the Salesforce Connect product.
Right. Gotcha. Now, moving things to one of my favorites, Apex. What are some considerations that you have in the series? And I feel like there's parallel here to what you were just saying about like data design. When people are starting to bring Apex into the modern app design, like what should they think about when they think, like, how should that piece fit into the jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah, excellent question again, right? So Apex, one thing to know about Apex is there's governor limits. So you have to know that there is a governor limit in place for good. It's a multi-tenant architecture. So, we showcase all the low-code tools. So one must know all the capabilities of the low-code tools. But where Apex shines is all of these low-code tools have ability to plug into Apex. Like, for example, let's consider flows, right? So a flow automation, right, can also invoke an Apex service. So the moment things start getting into this complexity, right? Let's say, you have a very complex logic. Let's say you need to use maps because, you have to pull together data from multiple objects. So for those type of use cases, right, then only you go for Apex. Or also you want to control your transaction, Let's say you want the sequence of events to happen one after the other. So that's where you actually use Apex, because you're controlling the transaction. You have some complex logic to write, and low-code tools can go only to a certain limit. But those tools also have interfaces where you can plug and play Apex. Similarly, Apex can also be used for Lightning Web Components, as wire adapters. So you have wire adapters that can call the Apex, right? And Apex also has the power to reach to external services, like a service hosted on Heroku or somewhere, on the internet. So those type of use cases, right? And what I recommend for all the developers listening here is go and check out Apex recipes, actually. So Kevin has put together a lot of time, building those Apex recipes. It has patterns. Like when you're writing Apex, right, you need to have a design pattern in place. Otherwise, you will slowly run out into a mess. You'll slowly start running yourself into a mess. You don't have design patterns. It becomes very difficult to debug, right? So Kevin has put together some design patterns around, what should be the security best practices? What are some of the trigger patterns? So he shows an example of a trigger pattern, essentially, that this is how you approach. And there are a lot more recipes there, just everything that you want to learn about Apex, right? The use cases specifically, I think Kevin has it covered. And that's what we used in the Modern App development series as well, where we showcase different recipes and we adopted one of those code that Kevin has put together and sort of modified to our use case here.
Right. And I have to ask this question because it's kind of inadvertently turned into a theme on the show. And I just kind of love pulling developers' opinions on this. But just describe to me how important unit testing is.
It's extremely, extremely important. As a developer, it's very hard to actually get into this habit of doing a test-driven development. So it is a habit that you want to really, have or build. It takes time, actually. But, the real benefit comes when you put together a continuous integration and continuous delivery system in place.
Yes.
So with that, what happens, Josh, is you will see that your regression bugs are caught pretty quickly because you have the tests in place, right? So let's say you try to fix something and break some other thing, your regression, even though you don't have a manual regression testing, because you have the CI/CD in place, it's going to run all your Apex tests, it's going to run all your LWCs, Jest tests. So it's going to make sure that all those tests where you have essentially added system asserts for your previous business requirements, right? Those pass or fail, you will know that, right? So let's say they fail, you know that, oh, no, this is not good code to ship, right? You have to go back and fix certain things. So it makes refactoring a bit easier once you have like unit tests in place. Of course, it is harder. It's a lot of investment up front. But once you have like your application like up and running, then Apex tests is going to make it very easy for you to refactor and also make sure that you have some quality control in place. And, it's automated for you. So
Right. Now, bringing things back down to the client, what was your experience with using the Sketch plugin for LWC?
Oh, that was an interesting learning actually for me. So I'll tell you my story as a developer. So as a developer, I rarely care about the user interface. That's my, that I don't know, it's with all the developers or it's just me, but generally, right, it's like, okay, get something working. That's it. I don't care about how these forms look. I don't care about where the button is sort of in place, right? But my users actually care about it.
Right.
My users who are actually using the application, they really care about it, and everything actually matters. So that's why, I've learned this, by working with various designers. I was, lucky enough to work with some designers in my past company and also in Salesforce now. I have a good connection with the design team, especially Adam Doughty and the team, the Lightning Design team. So Lightning, SLDS, Salesforce Lightning Design System. So I recommend everyone to actually go look at Salesforce Lightning Design Systems. So, but the idea with the Sketch, right? So coming back to the Sketch, like, okay, so what Sketch tool allows you to do is it allows you to prototype something, before you actually build. So this, Josh, that building is the expensive thing, right? So if I build something and then my, stakeholders come and say, hey, this is not what we wanted, to refactor and get them what is required, this is an iterative process, and you might spend a lot more time than, if you validate your design up front. And that's where these tools like Sketch plugins for SLDS plays a huge role, because, you're using the same lighting design systems in the base components, and that's what is offered as a plugin in the Sketch tool. So Sketch is just a tool to design, and, it's not just designed for designers, it's also for admins and developers. So what you can do is you can use that tool, you can drag and drop and put your layouts, even mock up your components, again, both in high fidelity, low fidelity, depending on your stakeholders, right, what they want to see, right? So you can mock that up, go to your actual users, ask them that, hey, if I build something like this, is this what you're thinking, is this what you want? And if they say, yeah, this looks exactly like what I was thinking, right? So then with Sketch you can actually iterate very quickly, because you're not really building, you're just dragging and dropping stuff,
right?
So Sketch is interesting to me. So that's why I thought that we need some content on that, and I collaborated with the design team, and thanks to them for actually working out with me. In fact, we had our customers in one of our shows. So we had a designer join from CarMax, and I was interested to actually begin a conversation with the designer on how do they collaborate with developers and admins, right? Because as a designer also, right, if you don't know the limits of the Salesforce, and you don't know the offerings of the Salesforce, you can design something, that might take a lot more time than, you might design something that, that might be pixel perfect, but that, with the amount of time that you have, the budget that you have, it might be, really not a good activity. So I wanted to collaborate and see how the team at CarMax actually does it. And, Brian did a very good job. He is a senior designer. He did a very good job at explaining me that, hey, he has to work in collaboration with the developers, Salesforce developers, and make sure that he produces something that's really something that they can build.
And that's our show. Now, before we go, I did ask after Mohith's favorite non-technical hobby. And it turns out that, like a lot of people these days, he's getting back in touch with nature.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My favorite non-technical hobby, I must say that during the summers, it is playing badminton.
Nice.
Yeah, badminton out there. In winters, we don't get to play that because there's some wind, and also it's pretty cold out there. So in winters, it's usually like reading fictional books or watching movies. Sometimes it's just feeding wild birds, and that's something that, got interested. Like I got interested because I see a lot of birds here.
Yeah.
And, we have this feeder, like the bird feeder. So we bought, a couple of bird feeders, and we try with different seeds and see what type of birds are coming. And it's pleasure to watch them, actually.
I want to thank Mo for the great conversation and information. And as always, thank you for listening. Now, if you'd like to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see the show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.